Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are exploring a site that honestly completely shatters our understanding of ancient history.
Okay, picture a puzzle so flawlessly designed, or honestly maybe just so fundamentally bizarre, that it has absolutely defeated the most brilliant minds in human history. We're talking professional cryptographers from both World War I and World War II, elite codebreakers, and even today's highly advanced AI statistical algorithms. Every single one of them has hit a brick wall, spinning their digital wheels to no avail. So what book could possibly hold its secrets so tightly for over 600 years? Welcome to This Explainer on the Voynich Manuscript. It's an artifact so deeply enigmatic, it literally has its own unreadable language that we've just dubbed Voynichese. This handwritten, heavily illustrated codex has provoked centuries of intense study, frustration, and, some pretty wild speculation. Today, we're going to break down the physical evidence, the bizarre contents, the unbreakable code itself, and the shadowy history of this fascinating document. We'll look at what we actually know, what we don't, and why this 600-year-old mystery just continues to captivate the world, tapping into our innate human obsession with finding patterns in the unknown. Let's dive right into Section 1, the most mysterious book. If we're going to treat this like a physical crime scene, the very first thing we need is hard science. Before we even attempt to read the unreadable text, we have to look at the artifact itself. Now, for a long time, researchers actually debated whether the manuscript was just a relatively modern forgery, like a clever hoax cooked up in a Victorian parlor. But in 2009, researchers at the University of Arizona radiocarbon dated the Vellum, which are the animal skin pages of the book, and the results were remarkably consistent. The parchment dates squarely between 1404 and 1438. Along with some stylistic analysis of the drawings, this anchors our mystery in a very specific, tangible window, the early 15th century, likely right during the Italian Renaissance. And here's what makes this crime scene so fascinating. It's the profound irony of how it was made. For a book that contains utterly impossible alien concepts, the physical materials are almost boringly normal. The evidence shows about 240 surviving pages, originally around 272, grouped into 18 quires, or folded sections, made from just standard calfskin vellum. The text and outlines were drawn using an everyday quill and iron gall ink. Even the paints used to color these strange illustrations were incredibly cheap. We're talking common ground azurite for blue, red ochre, and a copper chlorine compound for green. And those goatskin covers? They aren't even original. They were added much later by the Collegio Romano. So we're looking at standard, cheap, off-the-shelf 15th century supplies. There's no magic in the ink, just in the mind of whoever held the quill. And that mundane reality tells a pretty compelling story. Medievalist Lisa Fagan Davis points out that the parchment is soft, which indicates a texture found in books that have been heavily thumbed. This wasn't some pristine, sacred, ceremonial object locked away in a glass case. It completely lacks luxury touches like gold leaf. The parchment even has holes from insect bites and natural scars that a wealthy buyer would have immediately rejected. It was handled constantly, flipped through day after day. This was a highly used, work-like manual of some kind, worn down by the desperate hands of people trying to understand it. All right, moving on to Section 2, inside the bizarre pages. So the physical materials are normal, but highly used. What exactly were they looking at so often? Well, let's open the covers and embark on a descent into absolute madness. Because the visual evidence is, frankly, baffling. Since the text cannot be read, scholars have divided the manuscript into 6 distinct sections based entirely on the illustrations. We start with this somewhat normal. There's a massive 126-page herbal section showing plants and a pharmaceutical section with apothecary jars. Then things escalate to the confusing. We get a recipes section with short text marked by stars and an astronomical section filled with zodiac symbols. Finally, we end on the outright bizarre, an obscure cosmological section, and most famously, a balneological section showing dozens of small nude women bathing in green pools that are connected by these elaborate, almost mechanical networks of fleshy pipes. It's a highly structured yet entirely alien layout that just defies logic. Let's zoom in on that massive herbal section for a second. You'd think, okay, it's a 15th century book about plants, so botanists should be able to identify them, right? Wrong. Mother Nature never made these. Only a couple of plants like a wild pansy can be tentatively identified. The rest appear to be impossible Frankenstein creations. The drawings show the roots of one species fastened to the leaves of another, topped with flowers from a third. These aren't just undiscovered plants. They are bizarre composite creations drawn with deliberate, painstaking care to look like something that could exist, but absolutely does not. Now, the absolute crown jewel of the visual oddities is found in the cosmological section. It's known as the Rosettes Folio. Imagine opening a dry, dense medical textbook, and suddenly a fold-out map of Middle-earth falls out. That is exactly the jarring nature of this manuscript. This massive 6-page fold-out is an incredibly expensive and difficult thing to include in a 15th century book. It depicts 9 islands, or rosettes, connected by causeways, featuring sweeping castles and what might even be a volcano. It firmly pulls the manuscript away from being a mere scientific text and transforms it into a geographical map of a pure fantasy world. Which brings us to Section 3, the Unbreakable Code. Now we move to the absolute core of the onion, the text itself. This is the script that famously humiliated professional World War II codebreakers like Elizabeth and William Friedman. They spent years painstakingly transcribing it onto IBM punch cards to absolutely no avail. And why did it defeat them? Well, the sheer volume of data we are looking at is just staggering. There are roughly 38,000 words in the manuscript, made up of about 9,000 unique words. It's written smoothly from left to right. Most characters are composed of 1 or 2 simple pen strokes, using an alphabet of about 20 to 25 distinct symbols. And maddeningly, there is 0 obvious punctuation to give you a place to catch a breath. But the statistical analysis of this text is where things get truly wild. Linguists like Claire Bowern have compared Voynich to natural human languages using a metric called second-order conditional entropy, or H2. In plain terms, this just measures how predictable a sequence of characters is. In natural languages that you or I speak, this H2 score is usually between 3 and 4. Voynich's is far more predictable, with an H2 around 2. This means the text is incredibly repetitive, like far more repetitive than normal human speech. Furthermore, in most languages, grammatical markers can appear right in the middle of words. But in Voynich's, certain characters only appear at the very beginning or the very end of words, never in the middle. It rigidly obeys structural rules that literally no known human language follows. And this creates a massive linguistic paradox that just leaves cryptographers baffled. Because while the character placement is incredibly weird, the word frequencies perfectly follow Zipf's law. This means the most frequent word appears twice as often as the second most frequent, which is exactly how natural human languages behave. Plus, the writing flow is flawless. There's no hesitation, no correction, none of the delay you would expect if a scribe were painstakingly translating text into a complex cipher. It even features 2 distinct dialects, Voynich A and Voynich B, used in different sections of the book. Yet, words differing by only 1 letter repeat with such unusual frequency that simple substitution ciphers just spit out gibberish. It mathematically looks exactly like a real language, but functionally acts completely alien. And if you thought this was just the obsessive work of a single eccentric genius locked in a tower, think again. Handwriting analysis by Lisa Fadgen-Davis tracked slight variations in the physical pen strokes, things like the microscopic size of loops and the exact curvature of crossbars. Her analysis identified 5 completely different scribes who worked on the book. This completely destroys the popular theory that this was the fabrication of a single madman. It was actually a collaborative project by a community. And honestly, that deepens the mystery significantly. Why would 5 different people perfectly coordinate their handwriting and stylistic rules to collectively write 38,000 words of pure gibberish? They were clearly communicating something deliberate. Let's turn to our final chapter, Section 4, A Shadowy History. So, who actually owned this impossibly weird, collaboratively written puzzle box? The first major historical blip comes from a letter tucked secretly inside the book, claiming that the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II purchased the manuscript for 600 ducats. To put that into perspective, that is a staggering 67.5 troy ounces of actual gold, an absolute fortune. He paid this exorbitant price based on the early and later completely debunked rumor that the legendary 13th century English polymath Roger Bacon was the original author. From the very beginning, this book commanded immense wealth and obsession. From there, the artifact's journey bounces across centuries in what feels like a fast-paced historical relay race. In 1639, a Prague alchemist named George Bathurst owned it, and he became so desperate that he wrote to scholars in Rome begging for help translating it. When he died, his friend Jan Marche Marchi inherited it and eventually shipped it off to the famous Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher in Rome in 1665. The book then just sat silently in a dark Jesuit vault for over 200 years, dodging confiscation by the Italian government in 1870 by being carefully hidden away in personal libraries. Finally, in 1912, Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich bought it in a discreet Vatican sale, giving the manuscript its modern name. Today, it resides safely at Yale University's Botanical Library. When Jan Mark Marchi packed up the manuscript and mailed it to Rome back in 1665, he included a cover letter detailing the absolute exhaustion the book caused its previous owner. He wrote, "To its deciphering he devoted unflagging toil, but his toil was in vain, for such sphinxes as these obey no one but their master." That haunting line really echoes across the centuries. It perfectly captures the eternal, soul-crushing frustration of every single person, from 17th century alchemists to 21st century computer scientists who has tried to decode it. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. Will the Voynich manuscript ever actually be read? We have the physical evidence of its creation, we have the statistical data of its syntax, but the actual context remains agonizingly out of reach. Perhaps the key is still out there somewhere, just waiting to be found in a dusty, forgotten archive. Or perhaps this Sphinx truly will obey no one. What do you think? Are we looking at a lost, highly complex language of the Renaissance, or just the greatest, most elaborate practical joke ever played on historians? Keep questioning the mysteries around you, and thank you for joining me on this explainer.